"Mom, apologize to my mother-in-law right now, or get out of my house." The words hit me like a physical blow. I was standing in the dining room of what used to be my home, the house where Winston and I celebrated 23 wedding anniversaries, where I'd cradled Julian as a newborn, where I'd rebuilt my life after becoming a widow. The same dining room where I was now being given an ultimatum by my own son. Julian was standing at the head of the table, his face flushed red, his green eyes, my eyes, filled with something I'd never seen directed at me before. Anger. Pure, unfiltered anger. And beside him, practically vibrating with satisfaction, was Nikki Valentino, my daughter-in-law, the woman who'd spent the last 2 years systematically dismantling the relationship I'd spent 32 years building with my only child. She was smiling, not even trying to hide it. That perfectly glossed mouth curved upward, those brown eyes gleaming with triumph as she watched her husband, my son, demand that I either humiliate myself or leave. My mother-in-law. That's what he'd called her. Not Nikki's mother. My mother-in-law. As if I were some distant relation, some interfering stranger who'd overstayed her welcome. I was his mother. I had given birth to him, raised him, sacrificed everything to give him the life he now enjoyed. And he was calling me someone's mother-in-law like I was the outsider in this family dynamic. The apology he was demanding? It was for something I'd said just 5 minutes earlier. Something true, something necessary, something I should have said months ago, but had held back out of respect for their marriage. We'd been sitting down to dinner, a dinner Nikki had generously organized to reconnect the family, as she'd put it in her text message 3 days prior. I should have known it was a trap. Nothing Nikki did was generous. Everything was calculated, planned, designed to serve her ultimate goal: complete control over Julian and complete elimination of my influence in his life. The meal had started innocently enough. Small talk about the weather, about Julian's work at the law firm, about my boutiques. But then Nikki had started. She always started subtly, testing the waters, seeing how much she could get away with before anyone pushed back. "You know what I've been reading a lot about lately?" she'd said, twirling her wine glass between perfectly manicured fingers. "Toxic family dynamics. It's so important to establish healthy boundaries with parents who can't accept that their children are adults now." I'd kept eating, keeping my expression neutral. This was her favorite tactic: make sweeping generalizations that were clearly directed at me while maintaining plausible deniability. If I reacted, I was sensitive and defensive. If I stayed silent, she took it as permission to continue. "There's this whole generation of mothers," she continued, her voice dripping with false concern, "who just can't let go. They built their entire identities around being moms, and now that their kids are grown, they don't know who they are anymore. So they try to insert themselves into their adult children's lives, making everything about them." Julian had shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. Nothing. My son, who I'd raised to stand up for what was right, who I'd taught to defend those who couldn't defend themselves, sat there in silence while his wife took thinly veiled shots at his mother. "It's really sad, actually," Nikki went on, warming to her subject. "These women from older generations, they just can't understand modern relationships. They come from a time when manipulation and guilt-tripping were considered normal parenting. And then they wonder why their kids need space." That's when she looked directly at me, her smile never wavering. Some women just can't accept that they're not the center of their children's universe anymore. I'd put down my fork carefully, very carefully, because my hands wanted to shake and I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much her words hurt. I looked at Julian first, giving him one last chance to defend me, to say something, anything. But he was staring at his plate, his jaw tight, his knuckles white around his wine glass. So I'd turned to Nikki, met her gaze steadily, and spoken in the calm, measured tone I'd perfected over 30 years of running a business. "Nikki, I built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. I raised a son on my own after my husband died. I've never needed to be the center of anyone's universe to know my worth. But I do know the difference between a mother who loves her son and a wife who needs to isolate him to maintain control. And I know which one of us is sitting here tearing down other women to feel important." The silence that followed was deafening. Nikki's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again, Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and then right on cue, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe you just said that to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "In my own home. Julian, did you hear what your mother just said to me?" And that's when Julian had stood up. That's when my son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, the man I'd been so proud of, had looked at me with those angry green eyes and delivered his ultimatum. "Mom, apologize to my mother-in-law right now or get out of my house." I stood there processing his words. My mother-in-law, get out of my house, this beautiful colonial in the heart of Boston that I'd lived in for 15 years. The house where Julian had learned to walk, where he'd studied for the LSATs, where Winston had taken his last breath. I'd given this house to Julian and Nikki as a wedding present 2 years ago, transferred the deed, all $850,000 worth of equity, as a gesture of trust and love. I thought it was a way of showing them I believed in their future together. Now, my son was telling me to get out of it. I looked at him, really looked at him. At 32 years old, he was successful, handsome, accomplished, a junior partner at one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. He wore a Tom Ford suit that I knew cost $3,000 because I'd taught him how to recognize quality. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his posture confident. On the surface, he was every inch the successful man I'd raised him to be, but his eyes told a different story. Underneath the anger, I could see something else: discomfort, guilt, the faintest flicker of uncertainty. He didn't really want to do this, but he was going to do it anyway because standing up to Nikki was harder than standing up to me, because I was his mother, and that meant I would always forgive him, always take him back, always be there. Didn't it? I shifted my gaze to Nikki. She was still crying, or pretending to cry. The tears looked real enough, but her eyes were bright with victory. She'd won, and she knew it. She'd finally maneuvered Julian into choosing between us, and he'd chosen her. This moment, right here, was what she'd been working towards since the day they got engaged. I could have fought back. I could have reminded Julian that this was my house before it was his. I could have pointed out that I'd paid for his entire education, that I'd built the wealth he was now enjoying, that every opportunity he'd ever had was because of my sacrifices. I could have listed every time Nikki had been cruel, every subtle manipulation, every calculated move to drive a wedge between us. I could have cried. I could have begged. I could have pleaded with my son to remember who I was, what we'd been to each other. But I didn't do any of those things, because in that moment, looking at my son's face, seeing the man he'd allowed himself to become, I realized something crucial. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to make their own mistakes and live with the consequences. I took a slow, deep breath. My heart was breaking, truly shattering into pieces, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "I love you." 3 words. That's all I said. "I love you." Julian blinked, clearly expecting something different. An apology, maybe, or an argument. Nikki's smile faltered for just a second, confusion flickering across her face. I picked up my Hermes bag from the back of my chair, the Kelly bag that Winston had given me for our 20th anniversary. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked toward the front door. My heels clicked against the hardwood floors that I'd refinished myself 10 years ago, past the console table where a photo of Winston still sat, past the staircase where Julian had fallen and broken his arm when he was 7. Past the living room where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays and mourned together after Winston died. I reached the front door, that heavy oak door with the brass handle that I'd polished 1,000 times, and pulled it open. The cool Boston evening air hit my face, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and possibilities I couldn't quite name yet. I didn't look back, didn't give Julian one more chance to stop me, didn't wait to see if he'd realize what he was doing. I just walked through that door, pulled it closed behind me with a quiet click, and headed down the front steps to my car. My hands were steady as I unlocked my Mercedes, steady as I slid into the driver's seat, steady as I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. It wasn't until I was 3 blocks away, stopped at a red light, that the tears finally came. They weren't the tears of someone who'd lost. They were tears of grief. Grief for the son I thought I'd raised, grief for the relationship I thought we'd had, grief for the future I thought we'd share. But underneath the grief was something else. Something that felt almost like relief, because I'd chosen dignity. I'd chosen self-respect. I'd chosen to walk away rather than beg for scraps of love from someone who'd just demanded I humiliate myself to stay in his life. I drove to my apartment in Back Bay, the penthouse I'd bought 5 years ago as an investment, never thinking I'd actually need it as my primary residence. It was beautiful, all glass and modern lines with a view of the Charles River. But it had always felt temporary, a place to stay when I was in the city late. Now it would be home. I parked in the underground garage and took the elevator up to the 15th floor. The apartment was dark, quiet, untouched, since I'd been there 3 weeks ago. I flipped on the lights, dropped my bag on the marble entryway table, and walked straight through to the balcony. The city spread out before me, lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Julian and Nikki were probably celebrating. She'd finally gotten what she wanted, me out of the picture, and he'd proven himself to be exactly what she'd molded him into, a man who would sacrifice his own mother to keep peace with his wife. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long moment. I could call him. I could text. I could explain why what he'd done was wrong, why Nikki was manipulating him, why he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But I didn't. Instead, I turned off my phone completely and went inside. I poured myself a glass of the Chateau Margaux that Winston and I had been saving for a special occasion, though I doubted either of us had imagined this particular occasion. I took it back out to the balcony and sat in the cool evening air, sipping wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and let myself fully feel the weight of what had just happened. My son had chosen his wife's ego over his mother's dignity. He'd demanded I apologize for speaking the truth. He'd called the house I'd given him his house and told me to get out of it, and I'd walked away. The question now was whether he'd ever realize what he'd lost, whether he'd ever understand that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt, whether he'd ever become the man I'd thought I was raising instead of the man Nikki was creating. I didn't know the answers. I couldn't predict the future. All I knew was that I'd made the right choice for me. I'd chosen myself, my dignity, my self-respect, even if it cost me my son. The wine was smooth, complex, with notes of dark fruit and oak. Winston would have loved it. I raised my glass to the stars, to his memory, to the life we'd built together before cancer took him away 8 years ago. I hope I did the right thing, I whispered into the darkness. I hope you'd be proud of me. The city lights blurred as fresh tears filled my eyes, but this time I let them fall, because I was alone now, and I could be as broken as I needed to be. Tomorrow, I'd put myself back together. Tomorrow, I'd be strong again. But tonight, I'd earned the right to grieve. I woke up the next morning in sheets that smelled wrong. Too clean, too sterile, missing the lavender sachets I always kept in my linen closet at the house. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. Julian's face, Nikki's smile, those 3 words I'd said before walking out. I love you. I rolled over and checked my phone. Part of me, a small, pathetic part I wasn't proud of, had hoped to see missed calls, text messages, some sign that Julian had come to his senses in the night. But the screen was blank, except for 2 texts from Octavia Clare, my best friend of 20 years. Dinner tonight? You've been dodging my calls. Genevieve, I'm worried about you. Please respond. I hadn't told her what happened yet, hadn't told anyone, because saying it out loud would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that level of reality yet. I made coffee in the unfamiliar kitchen, standing at the counter in my silk robe, watching the sun rise over the Charles River. The apartment was beautiful. I'd made sure of that when I bought it, but it felt empty in a way the house never had. That house had been full of memories, full of life. This place was just walls and furniture. As the coffee brewed, my mind drifted back, not to last night, but further, to the beginning, to how I'd gotten here. I was 25 when I arrived in Boston from Paris, carrying 2 suitcases and dreams that were probably too big for someone with my background. I'd grown up poor in the outskirts of Paris, the daughter of a seamstress who could barely afford to feed us. But my mother had taught me everything she knew about fabric, about construction, about the art of making something beautiful from nothing. And I'd learned. I met Winston Delacroix 3 months after arriving in America. He was 32, an architect who'd come into the tiny alteration shop where I was working to get a suit tailored. He was handsome in that understated way that ages well. Dark hair starting to gray at the temples, warm eyes, a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He asked me to dinner while I was pinning his jacket. I said no. I didn't date customers. He came back the next week with another suit that didn't need altering. Asked again. I said no again. The third time he came back, he brought flowers and a business card. "I'm not going to stop," he'd said, grinning. "I'm an architect. I'm very good at building things, including relationships, if you'll give me the chance." I'd laughed despite myself and said yes. We were married within a year. Winston supported my dreams in ways I'd never experienced before. When I told him I wanted to open my own boutique, he didn't laugh or tell me to be realistic. He helped me write a business plan, introduced me to investors, used his connections to help me find the perfect location in Back Bay. Atelier Genevieve opened when I was 28. It was tiny, barely 600 square feet, but it was mine. I sold custom pieces to Boston's elite, women who appreciated quality and were willing to pay for it. Within 3 years, I'd opened a second location. Within 10, I had 3 boutiques and a client list that included senators' wives and old money families who'd been in Boston since the Mayflower. Winston and I wanted children, but it took time. 5 years of trying, 2 miscarriages, and 1 devastating ectopic pregnancy that almost killed me. When I finally got pregnant with Julian, I was 33 and terrified every single day that something would go wrong. But nothing went wrong. Julian arrived healthy and perfect, with his father's dark hair and my green eyes. I'd never felt love like that before. Immediate, overwhelming, absolute. Looking at him for the first time, I understood why my mother had sacrificed everything for me. I built my business around being a mother. Hired managers so I could be at every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. Winston and I were a team. He handled the financial planning. I handled the day-to-day operations of the boutiques. We built wealth together, slowly and carefully. By the time Julian was 10, we were millionaires. By the time he was 15, we owned the house outright and had investments that would secure our retirement and his future. Then Winston died. It was sudden, a heart attack at 55. He was at a construction site, reviewing plans for a new office building downtown. One moment he was alive, pointing at blueprints and arguing with contractors. The next moment he was on the ground, and nothing anyone did could bring him back. Julian was 24, in his second year of law school. I was 49, and suddenly a widow. The grief was indescribable. Winston had been my partner in every sense of the word for 23 years. Half my life. He was supposed to grow old with me, retire with me, spoil our future grandchildren with me. Instead, I was planning his funeral. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense. The boutiques needed me. My employees needed me. And Julian needed me to be strong. He was devastated. Winston had been his hero, his role model, his best friend. I couldn't fall apart because Julian needed someone to hold him together. So I held us both together. I managed the estate, which Winston had meticulously organized. He was an architect, after all, everything in its proper place. I expanded the business, opening new revenue streams that Winston and I had discussed but never implemented. I made sure Julian could finish law school without worrying about money. And I was lonely. God, I was so lonely. But I had Julian. We grew closer after Winston died. Weekly lunches became our tradition. Every Sunday, no matter what. We'd try new restaurants or go back to our favorites, and we'd talk about everything. His classes, his future, his grief, my grief. Those lunches were sacred to me. They were the proof that even though I'd lost Winston, I hadn't lost everything. Then, 3 years after Winston's death, Julian met Nikki. He brought her to Sunday lunch without warning. I was already seated at our usual table at Brasserie Jo when he walked in with this woman I'd never seen before. She was beautiful. I noticed that immediately. Long, dark hair with expensive highlights, a designer dress that fit perfectly, the kind of polished look that money could buy. "Mom, this is Nikki Valentino," Julian had said, and something in his voice made me pay attention. "Nikki, My mother, Genevieve. We shook hands. Hers was soft, perfectly manicured. Mine was still strong from years of working with fabric and managing businesses. I smiled warmly because Julian seemed happy, and his happiness had been rare since losing his father. "It's wonderful to meet you," I'd said. "Julian hasn't mentioned you, so this is a lovely surprise." "We've been keeping things quiet," Nikki had replied, sliding into the seat next to Julian. "You know how it is in the beginning, but Julian talks about you constantly. I finally insisted on meeting the famous Genevieve." Famous was an interesting word choice. So was insisted. That first lunch was pleasant enough. Nikki was charming, asking questions about my business, complimenting my outfit, laughing at my stories. But there was something calculated about it. Every smile felt practiced. Every question felt strategic. When she touched Julian's arm, it was possessive. When she looked at me, there was assessment in her eyes. I ignored my instincts. I told myself I was being overprotective. Julian was 27, a grown man, and he deserved happiness. If this woman made him happy, then I would support it. The relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, they were living together. Within a year, they were engaged. Julian seemed different, quieter, more withdrawn. Our Sunday lunches became every other week, then monthly. He always had reasons. Work was busy. Nikki wasn't feeling well. They had plans with her friends. I met Nikki's parents once, at the engagement party. Her father was a real estate agent who clearly overextended himself trying to maintain appearances. Her mother was quiet, almost invisible, deferring to her husband on everything. I watched Nikki interact with them and saw the dynamic clearly. She'd grown up with a father who valued image over substance, and a mother who'd learned to make herself small. It explained a lot about who Nikki was, but it didn't excuse what she was becoming. The wedding was lavish. They'd wanted to pay for it themselves, but I insisted on contributing. $50,000 toward their dream wedding. Nikki chose everything: the venue, the flowers, the menu. She asked for my opinion exactly once about the invitations, then ignored my suggestion entirely. At the reception, during the mother-son dance, Julian held me close and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom, for raising me, for supporting me, for being you. I hope I can be half the parent you've been." I'd cried. Happy tears, I thought. Now I wondered if somewhere deep down, I'd already known I was losing him. My wedding gift to them was the house. $850,000 in equity, transferred cleanly and completely. Thomas, my brother-in-law, had advised against it. "At least keep your name on the deed," he'd said, "as a co-owner, just in case." But I hadn't listened. I wanted to show Julian I trusted him completely. I wanted to give him the home where he'd grown up, where his father had lived, where his future children could grow up. Nikki had smiled when I handed them the deed at the rehearsal dinner, but it wasn't a grateful smile. It was victorious. The problems started small: missed lunches, canceled plans. Julian always apologetic, always with reasonable excuses. Then came the comments. Little digs about older generation parenting styles and mother-son boundaries. Nikki would post on social media about family dinners that I wasn't invited to, tagging Julian's cousins and friends, but somehow always forgetting to include me. I tried talking to Julian about it twice. Both times, he defended her. "She's just trying to establish our own family identity, Mom. It's not about you." But it was about me. It was always about me. About removing me from the equation so she could have complete control over my son. And last night, she'd finally succeeded. My coffee had gone cold while I was lost in memories. I poured it down the sink and stared at my reflection in the window. 57 years old, still elegant, still successful, still strong, but without my son. The question was what I would do about it. Would I fight? Would I wait? Would I accept that this was my new reality? I didn't have answers yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to beg. Octavia showed up at my apartment that evening without calling first. I heard the knock and knew immediately it was her. 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 2 more. Our signal from years ago, back when we were younger and thought secret knocks were sophisticated. I opened the door to find her standing there with 2 bottles of wine and a look that said she knew something was wrong. "You've been avoiding me," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. and you only avoid me when something terrible has happened. So we're going to drink this wine, and you're going to tell me everything." Octavia Clare had been my best friend since we met at a charity gala 20 years ago. She was a gallery owner, sharp, sophisticated, divorced twice, and proudly single. She wore her gray hair in a sleek bob and had a way of cutting through nonsense that I'd always admired. I tried to protest, but she was already opening the wine. Within 10 minutes, I'd told her everything: the dinner, Nikki's comments, my response, Julian's ultimatum, those 3 words I'd said before walking out. Octavia listened in silence, her expression growing darker with every sentence. When I finished, she took a long drink of wine and set her glass down with enough force that I worried it might shatter. "That manipulative little bitch," she said flatly. "And your son? Jesus, Genevieve, what the hell was he thinking?" He was thinking that keeping peace with his wife was more important than respecting his mother. "No." Octavia leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "He was thinking that you'd always be there, that mothers forgive everything, that he could treat you however he wanted and you'd just take it because that's what mothers do." She paused. "But you didn't take it. You walked out. Good. It doesn't feel good. It wouldn't. You love him. But Genevieve, listen to me." She grabbed my hand. "I've watched this happen over the past 2 years. I've watched that woman systematically isolate Julian from everyone who actually cares about him. From you, from Thomas, from his college friends. She posts these perfect little pictures on Instagram of their intimate dinners and quiet nights in, and everyone thinks they're so in love. But what they're really seeing is a woman who's terrified her husband might remember he has a life outside of her. I'd known all of this, of course, but hearing Octavia say it out loud made it more real somehow. "The question is," she continued, "what are you going to do now?" "Nothing," I said. "I'm going to do nothing?" Octavia raised an eyebrow. "Nothing?" "Nothing. I'm not going to call him. I'm not going to text him. I'm not going to show up at his office or send him letters or try to explain myself. I said what I needed to say. I love you. If that's not enough, then nothing else I could say would matter anyway. And if he never reaches out? If Nikki convinces him that you're the villain in this story?" I'd thought about that. All day, I'd thought about that. "Then I'll have my answer about who my son really is, and I'll have to learn to live with it." Octavia studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're stronger than I am. I'd be lighting up his phone right now, leaving voicemails explaining exactly why his wife is a manipulative nightmare. That's the difference between us. You've never had children. You don't understand that sometimes loving someone means letting them make their own mistakes." I took a sip of wine. "Even when those mistakes break your heart." We drank in silence for a while. Then Octavia asked the question I'd been dreading. "Have you thought about the fact that you could take back the house?" "What?" "The house. Thomas told me. I saw him last week at the museum fundraiser. He said he advised you to keep your name on the deed as co-owner, but you transferred it completely. But there might be ways to contest the transfer if you can prove coercion or diminished capacity or—" "No." My voice was sharp. "Absolutely not. Genevieve, I gave Julian that house as a gift, a genuine gift. I'm not going to try to take it back because he hurt my feelings. That would make me exactly what Nikki is trying to convince him I am. A controlling mother who uses money to manipulate. But you're not. It doesn't matter what I am. It matters what it would look like. And I won't do it. I have my dignity, Octavia. It's all I have left right now. I'm not going to compromise it by playing Nikki's game." Octavia sighed, but didn't argue further. We finished the first bottle of wine and started on the second. By the time she left, it was nearly midnight, and I was pleasantly numb. Not drunk. I hadn't been drunk since my wedding night, but fuzzy enough that I thought I might actually sleep. I was wrong. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 2 years, every missed lunch, every canceled plan, every time Julian had defended Nikki's behavior instead of acknowledging my concerns. How had I not seen this coming? How had I let it get this far? The answer was simple and painful, because I'd wanted to believe that love was enough, that the 32 years of history between Julian and me would outweigh 2 years with Nikki. That blood was thicker than water, or whatever other platitude I'd been telling myself. But I'd been wrong. Love wasn't enough. History wasn't enough. And blood? Blood could be diluted pretty damn easily when manipulation was involved. The days that followed were strange. I threw myself into work. There was always work, but my mind kept drifting. I'd be in the middle of a consultation with a client and suddenly remember Julian at 8 years old, showing me a drawing he'd made in school. Or I'd be reviewing financial statements and think about the time he'd called me from law school, panicking about his torts exam, and I'd stayed on the phone with him for 3 hours helping him study. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, to a different version of Julian who didn't exist anymore. On the 4th day after the incident, I'd started thinking of it as the incident, as if giving it a name would make it more manageable. My phone rang. For a split second, my heart leaped. Maybe it was Julian. Maybe he'd come to his senses. But it was Thomas. Genevieve. His deep voice was troubled. I heard what happened. How? I hadn't told anyone except Octavia. Julian came to see me yesterday. He looked terrible. Wanted to talk about Winston, about the kind of man his father was. I asked him what was going on, and it all came out. Thomas paused. What he did was inexcusable. Did you tell him that? In so many words, yes. I also told him that his father would be ashamed of the man he's become. Another pause. He cried, Genevieve. Broke down completely. Said he didn't know how things had gotten so out of control, that he didn't know how to fix it. Something twisted in my chest. Julian had cried. My son was in pain. Every maternal instinct I had screamed at me to call him, to tell him it was okay, that we could fix this together. But I didn't. What did you tell him? I asked Thomas. I told him that sorry isn't enough, that he needs to figure out who he is, a man who stands up for what's right, or a man who lets himself be controlled by someone who sees him as a possession. And I told him that his mother deserves better than an apology. She deserves action. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I also told him that if he doesn't fix this, he's going to lose you forever. And I meant it, Genevieve. You can't keep the door open indefinitely. At some point, you need to close it and move on. I knew he was right. But moving on from your only child? How did someone do that? The call with Thomas was on a Wednesday. On Thursday, my phone rang 4 times from Julian's number. I didn't answer. He left one voicemail, which I deleted without listening. On Friday, he showed up at the boutique. My manager, Claire, came into my office looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Delacroix, your son is here. He's asking to see you. Tell him I'm in a meeting. He says he'll wait. Then tell him I have meetings all afternoon and I'm leaving town this evening for a buying trip. It was a lie. I had no buying trip planned. But I wasn't ready to face Julian yet. Not when Thomas had told me he'd cried. Not when I was still fighting every instinct to fix this for him, the way I'd fixed everything else in his life. Claire returned 10 minutes later. He left this. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. I recognized Julian's messy scrawl immediately. He'd never had good handwriting despite my best efforts to teach him. The letter started with Mom and ended with, "Please call me. I love you. I'm sorry." I read the whole thing once, sitting at my desk with tears streaming down my face. He apologized for what he'd said he'd been wrong, that he'd let Nikki manipulate the situation, that he should have defended me. But the letter was vague on specifics. He didn't acknowledge the pattern of behavior over the past 2 years. Didn't acknowledge that the dinner had just been the final straw in a long series of disrespects and dismissals. He was sorry for the moment, but not for everything that had led to it. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Then I went back to work. The second week was harder than the first. The numbness started to wear off, and underneath it was grief so profound it felt physical. I'd lost Winston to death 8 years ago. Now I'd lost Julian to something worse, to his own choices, his own weakness, his own willingness to sacrifice me for an easier life. Octavia came over 3 more times. Thomas called every other day. Even some of my employees, who'd noticed something was wrong, asked carefully if I was okay. I told everyone the same thing. I was fine, just tired. Business was demanding right now. No one believed me, but they were kind enough to pretend. On day 12, something changed. I woke up and realized I was angry. Not sad, not grieving, angry. Angry at Julian for being weak. Angry at Nikki for being calculating. Angry at myself for not seeing this coming sooner, for not putting a stop to it when the signs first appeared. for letting Julian get away with small disrespects because I didn't want to cause conflict. The anger felt better than the grief. It felt active, powerful, like something I could actually use. I went to work that morning with a new energy. I scheduled meetings I'd been putting off. I made decisions about the business I'd been postponing. I called my financial advisor and asked for a complete review of my portfolio. I wanted to know exactly where I stood, what resources I had, what my life looked like independent of any connection to Julian. The numbers were good, better than good. Between the 3 boutiques, my investments, and the properties I owned outright, I was worth just over $4.2 million. I didn't need Julian's success. I didn't need his validation. I didn't need anything from him except respect, and that was the one thing he'd proven he couldn't give me. On day 13, Nikki posted on Instagram. It was a photo of her and Julian at some trendy new restaurant downtown. She was laughing. Julian was smiling, though the smile didn't reach his eyes if you knew how to look. And the caption read, "Date night with my favorite person. Sometimes you have to cut out toxic energy to make room for peace and love. So grateful for this man and the beautiful life we're building together. Blessed life, healthy boundaries, love wins." Octavia sent me a screenshot with a string of expletives that would have made a sailor blush. I stared at that photo for a long time. At Nikki's triumphant smile, at Julian's hollow eyes, at the way she was holding onto his arm like she was afraid he might float away if she let go. And I realized something important. Nikki was afraid. The post wasn't about celebrating their relationship. It was about trying to convince everyone, including herself, that she'd won, that removing me from the picture had made things better. But Julian's face told a different story. I commented on the post, just 4 words. "You look tired, sweetheart." It was subtle. Anyone else reading it would think it was a concerned mother's comment to her son. But Nikki would know. She'd understand that I saw through her carefully curated image to the truth underneath. Within an hour, my comment was deleted. But I'd made my point. That night, Julian tried calling me again. 7 times in a row. Then texts started coming through. "Mom, please, we need to talk. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I made a terrible mistake. Please let me explain. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I need to talk to you. Mom, I'm begging you. Please." I read every message. And then I turned off my phone and went to bed. Because begging wasn't enough. Being sorry wasn't enough. Even acknowledging he'd made a mistake wasn't enough. What I needed was for Julian to figure out who he was without me guiding him. To make a choice, not because it was easy or because someone was pushing him toward it, but because it was right. To prove that the values I'd spent 32 years teaching him hadn't been completely erased by 2 years with a woman who saw him as a possession rather than a person. And until he could do that, I had nothing to say to him. On day 14, exactly 2 weeks after I'd walked out of that house, everything changed. I was at home, sitting on my balcony with morning coffee, when my doorbell rang. It was barely 7 in the morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and felt my heart stop. Julian was standing in my hallway. He was still wearing yesterday's suit, rumpled and creased like he'd slept in it. His hair was a mess, his eyes were red and swollen, and he was holding a manila folder that looked like it was packed with documents. He saw the peephole darken as I looked through it. "Mom!" His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Mom, please, I know you're there. I need to talk to you. Please. I'm begging you. I know I don't deserve it, but please, just 5 minutes, please." I stood frozen with my hand on the door handle. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Whatever was in that folder, whatever Julian had to say, was going to change everything. The question was, did I open the door? My hand tightened on the handle. I took a breath, and I made my choice. I opened the door. Julian looked worse up close. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale and drawn. He had at least 2 days of stubble on his jaw, and there was a coffee stain on his white shirt. This was not the polished, put-together lawyer I'd raised. This was a man who was falling apart. "Thank you," he breathed. "Thank you for opening the door." I didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let him in, then closed the door behind him. He stood in my entryway looking lost, clutching that folder like it was a lifeline. "Do you want coffee?" I asked, my voice neutral. He shook his head. I need to show you something. I need you to see. His voice cracked. I need you to understand what I didn't see. What I should have seen years ago, but I was too blind, too stupid, too… Julian. I kept my tone calm. Sit down. Take a breath. We moved to the living room. He sat on the edge of the couch. I took the armchair across from him. The same positions we'd sat in countless times over the years when he needed to talk to me about something important. His first girlfriend. His college acceptance letters. His decision to propose to Nikki. God, I should have said something that day. Thomas came to see me 3 days ago, Julian started, his hands shaking as he opened the folder. Not at home, at my office. He said he needed to show me something, and that if I had any of Dad's integrity left in me, I'd look at it objectively. He pulled out a stack of papers, printouts of what looked like text messages and social media posts. He spread them on the coffee table between us. These are screenshots from Nikki's private conversations with her friends. Thomas got them from… He hesitated. It doesn't matter how he got them. What matters is what they say. I leaned forward and started reading. The first was a conversation with someone named Amber, dated from 3 months before Julian and Nikki got engaged. Nikki, I'm telling you, this is IT. Julian is perfect. His mother is loaded. He's going to make partner. And he's so desperate for family after losing his dad that he'll do whatever I want. Amber, but do you actually love him? Nikki, I love what he can give me. Security, status, a trust fund mother-in-law who will probably leave everything to her precious son. That's better than love. My stomach turned. I looked at Julian. He was crying silently, tears streaming down his face. Keep reading, he whispered. The next conversation was from 6 months after their wedding. Nikki, the mother-in-law situation is getting annoying. She's always around, always texting Julian, always wanting to have lunch. I need to start cutting that cord. Amber, how are you going to do that? Nikki, slowly. Cancel plans. Make him choose between us. Play the victim when she pushes back. Classic isolation tactics. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. There were dozens more. Screenshots of Nikki mocking Julian to her friends, calling him a project husband and a work in progress. Messages where she bragged about manipulating him into canceling plans with me. Posts in private groups about training your husband and managing difficult in-laws. The worst one was from 2 weeks before the dinner, the night everything exploded. Nikki, time to force the issue. I'm going to engineer a situation where Julian has to choose between me and his mother. I'll make sure I'm crying, and she looks like the aggressor. He'll choose me. Men always choose the woman they're sleeping with over their mother. And once she's out of the picture, I'll have complete control. Amber, what if he doesn't choose you? Nikki, he will. Trust me. I've been setting this up for 2 years. I set down the papers carefully. My hands wanted to shake, but I wouldn't let them. I looked at my son, who was sobbing openly now, his shoulders shaking. When did you see these? I asked quietly. 3 days ago. Thomas brought them to my office and made me read every single one while he watched. Then, he asked me one question. Julian wiped his eyes roughly. He asked, "Is this the kind of woman your father would have wanted you to marry? Is this the kind of man your father raised you to be?" What did you answer? I couldn't. I couldn't say anything because the answer was so obvious it made me sick. No, Dad would have been disgusted. With her, and with me for letting myself be manipulated like this. He looked up at me, his green eyes, my eyes, full of anguish. I went home that night and I confronted her, showed her the printouts, asked her to explain. And? She denied it at first, said Thomas had fabricated them, that you'd probably paid him to create fake evidence to break us up. But I'd already verified them, checked her phone while she was sleeping the night before, found the actual conversations. They were real. All of it was real. He took a shuddering breath. When she realized I had proof, she changed tactics, started crying, saying she'd been venting to friends but didn't mean any of it, that she really loved me, that I was abandoning her just like everyone else had. What did you do? I told her I wanted a divorce, that I'd already contacted a lawyer, that the prenup you insisted on would protect everything, and she needed to move out. His voice was hollow. She screamed at me for 3 hours, called me every name you can imagine, said I was a mama's boy who would never be a real man, that you'd manipulated me my entire life, and now you were destroying my marriage, that I was pathetic for believing fake screenshots over my own wife. He pulled out another document from the folder. This is the prenuptial agreement. I had my lawyer review it yesterday. Because you insisted on this, because you protected me even when I was angry at you for not trusting Nikki, she gets nothing. No house, no money, no claim to any of my assets. She came into this marriage with a used Honda and an Instagram account. That's what she's leaving with. I should have felt satisfaction, vindication, some sense of being proven right, but all I felt was tired. Where is she now? I asked. Staying with friends, threatening to contest the divorce, but her lawyer already told her she has no grounds. The prenup is ironclad. He set the papers down and looked at me directly. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately, completely sorry. I let that woman manipulate me into treating you, the person who sacrificed everything for me, like you were the problem. I chose her over you. I told you to leave your own house. Our house. Dad's house. Yes, I said simply. You did. Can you ever forgive me? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Behind me, I could hear Julian's ragged breathing, waiting for my answer. Do you love her? I asked without turning around. No, I don't think I ever did. I think I loved the idea of having a family again after losing Dad, and she knew exactly how to exploit that. And what have you learned? There was a long silence. Then Julian said, that love without respect is worthless. That family isn't about control. It's about support. That the people who really love you will tell you hard truths, not just what you want to hear. And that my mother, his voice broke again. My mother loved me enough to walk away rather than watch me destroy myself, even though it broke her heart. I turned to face him. It did break my heart. It's still broken. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix it. If you'll let me. I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in 2 weeks. At the man sitting broken on my couch, holding evidence of his own foolishness, begging for forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. Julian, I said slowly, I told you I loved you that night. Do you remember? Yes. Those were the only words you said before you left. Do you know why I said that? He shook his head, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. Because I needed you to understand something. I needed you to know that even when you were at your worst, when you were demanding I humiliate myself, when you were choosing her manipulation over my dignity, I still loved you. Because that's what real love is. It doesn't disappear when someone disappoints you. It doesn't evaporate when they make terrible choices. I walked back to my chair and sat down. But love and trust are not the same thing. Love and respect are not the same thing. I love you, Julian. I've loved you from the moment you were born. But right now, I don't trust you. And I'm not sure I respect the man you've allowed yourself to become. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Good. He needed to hear this. You came here with evidence that Nikki manipulated you, I continued. And that's true. She did. But Julian, you let her. Every time you canceled our lunch plans, every time you made excuses for her behavior, every time you chose to believe her version of events over your own judgment. Those were your choices. She couldn't have isolated you from me if you hadn't allowed it. I know. His voice was barely a whisper. Do you? Because saying you know and truly understanding are different things. Thomas showed you those messages 3 days ago. That was 3 days of you knowing the truth about your wife. But it's been 2 weeks since you threw me out of my own house. 2 weeks of silence before you came here. Why? Julian looked up at me, confusion in his eyes. I tried to call you, multiple times. You didn't answer. That's right. I didn't. Do you know why? Because you were angry. Because I hurt you. No. I leaned forward. Because I needed to know if you could figure this out yourself. If you could look at your life, your choices, your marriage, and recognize that something was fundamentally wrong, not because someone showed you proof, but because you developed enough self-awareness to see it. Understanding dawned on his face. The messages. If Thomas hadn't shown you those messages, would you be sitting here right now? Or would you still be at home with Nikki, convinced that I was the toxic one? Convinced that cutting me out of your life was healthy and necessary? He opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew the answer. That's what scares me, Julian. It took explicit, irrefutable evidence of manipulation for you to see what I'd been trying to tell you for 2 years. You couldn't trust your own judgment. You couldn't trust me. You needed screenshots and text messages to believe what should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. You're right. His voice was hollow. You're absolutely right. I've been so blind, so weak. Stop. I held up my hand. I don't need you to beat yourself up. I need you to understand why this is going to take time. You want me to forgive you immediately because you've apologized and you're getting divorced, and you've brought me evidence that you were manipulated. But Julian, forgiveness without changed behavior is meaningless. How do I know you won't meet another woman who knows exactly which buttons to push? How do I know you won't fall into the same patterns? I'll prove it to you. However long it takes, whatever I need to do. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You want to prove it to me. But you need to prove it to yourself first. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down a photo album I'd brought from the house. I opened it to a picture of Julian at his law school graduation. Winston had been gone for 3 years by then, but Julian was smiling broadly, his arm around my shoulders. Do you remember this day? Of course. You threw that party for me, invited half my graduating class. Do you remember what you said in your speech? He thought for a moment. I thanked you for everything you'd sacrificed, for putting me through school, for believing in me. You said something else too. You said, my mother taught me that integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about who you are when no one would ever know. Do you remember that? Yes. Do you believe it? Julian stared at the photo for a long moment. I used to. That's the problem. You used to believe a lot of things. You used to believe in standing up for what's right. You used to believe in loyalty. You used to believe in respecting the people who love you. And somewhere along the way, you stopped. I closed the album gently. I don't blame Nikki for that. She's responsible for her own manipulations, yes. But you're responsible for letting yourself be manipulated, for abandoning your principles the moment they became inconvenient. How do I fix it? His voice was desperate now. Tell me how to fix it, Mom. Please. I can't tell you. That's the whole point. You need to figure out who you want to be, not who I want you to be, not who your father would have wanted, not who Nikki tried to make you. Who Julian Delacroix actually is when all the external pressure is removed. I sat back down. You want my forgiveness? You want our relationship back? Then show me through consistent action over time that you've learned this lesson. Not with grand gestures, not with apologies. With steady, reliable, authentic behavior that proves you've actually changed. How long? As long as it takes. Maybe months. Maybe years. I don't know, Julian. But here's what I do know. I'm not going to be the one chasing you anymore. I'm not going to be the one calling, planning lunches, trying to maintain our relationship while you put in minimal effort. If you want me in your life, you need to prove it. Consistently. Without me prompting you. Without me having to ask. He was crying again, but this time there was something different in his expression. Not just grief, but understanding. Acceptance. I'll do it, he said. Whatever it takes. I'll show you. Maybe you will. Or maybe 6 months from now, when your life has settled down and you're not in crisis mode anymore, you'll slip back into old patterns. You'll get busy with work, with dating, with rebuilding your life, and our relationship will slide to the bottom of your priority list again. I've seen it happen before. Not this time. I swear to you, not this time. I hope you're right. But Julian, you need to understand something clearly. I looked him in the eyes. If this happens again, if you ever treat me with that level of disrespect again, if you ever choose someone who demands that I compromise my dignity, if you ever make me feel like I'm less important than keeping peace with someone else, I will walk away permanently. There won't be another chance. I love you enough to give you this opportunity to make things right, but I love myself enough to know when to close the door forever. I understand. Do you? Because you need to really understand. I'm 57 years old. I don't have unlimited time to wait for you to figure out how to be a good son. I don't have endless patience for broken promises and half-hearted efforts. This is it. Your one chance to prove that the man I raised is still in there somewhere. Julian stood up suddenly and dropped to his knees in front of my chair. It was such a dramatic gesture that I almost laughed. Almost. But the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't performing. He was genuinely, completely broken. Mom, I know I don't deserve this. I know I've failed you in every possible way. But I'm begging you, please don't give up on me completely. I can't lose you. I can't lose the only parent I have left because I was too stupid to see what was right in front of me. He grabbed my hands. I'm going to prove myself to you. I'm going to show you that I'm still the son you raised, that Dad's values are still in me somewhere, that I can be the man you both believed I could be. I looked down at him, this tall, successful man kneeling on my floor like a child seeking absolution, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the first tiny crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. Get up, I said softly. You don't need to kneel. You're not a child anymore. He stood, wiping his eyes roughly with his sleeve. What happens now? Now you go home. You deal with your divorce. You handle your life. And in a week, if you want to, you can call me and we can have lunch. Just lunch. Nothing heavy, nothing dramatic. Just two people having a meal together and starting to rebuild trust, one conversation at a time. A week? He looked like I'd told him it would be a year. Yes, a week. You need time to process all of this without me there to guide you through it. You need to sit with your choices, your mistakes, your plans for the future. You need to figure out who you are when I'm not available to provide answers. I stood up. And honestly, Julian, I need time too. I need time to decide if I can really do this, if I can really open myself up to being hurt by you again. You're considering not forgiving me. The fear in his voice was palpable. I'm considering everything. That's what happens when someone breaks your trust this completely. You have to evaluate whether the relationship is worth the risk of being broken again. I walked toward the door, and he followed. But I'm giving you this chance, so take it seriously. Use this week to really think about what you want and who you want to be. He nodded, clutching the folder of evidence against his chest like armor. At the door, he turned back to me. Mom, He started, then stopped. No, I'm not going to say I'm sorry again. You've heard that enough. Instead, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for not slamming this door in my face. Thank you for loving me even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for being stronger than I was. You're welcome. Now go. I'll talk to you in a week. He left, and I closed the door behind him. I stood there in my entryway for a long moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway, hearing the elevator ding as he left. Then I walked to my bedroom, lay down on the bed, and cried harder than I had in years. Not just sad tears. These were tears of rage, grief, relief, fear, and something that might have been hope. My son had come back. But would he stay? Could I trust him again? Did I even want to? I didn't have answers. All I had was the knowledge that I'd stood my ground, maintained my dignity, and refused to make it easy for him. I'd done the hardest thing a mother can do. I'd let my child face the full consequences of his actions without rushing in to fix everything. Whether it would be enough to save our relationship, only time would tell. But at least now, there was a chance. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. Not because I was waiting for Julian to call, though part of me was, but because I was doing something I should have done years ago. I was figuring out who Genevieve Delacroix was independent of being someone's mother. I'd built a business empire. I'd survived immigration, poverty, widowhood. I'd raised a son through grief and adolescence in law school. But somewhere along the way, I'd made Julian's happiness more important than my own boundaries. I'd sacrificed my dignity piece by piece, telling myself it was what good mothers did. I was done with that version of myself. On Monday, I met with my financial advisor and restructured my portfolio. I was taking steps I should have taken years ago, ensuring that my businesses would continue without me, that my wealth was protected, that I had a legacy beyond just Julian's mother. On Tuesday, I had lunch with Octavia at our favorite bistro. She took one look at my face and said, "He came to see you." "How did you know?" "Because you look different. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe just less destroyed." She sipped her wine. "What happened?" I told her everything. The documents, the conversation, the conditions I'd set. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're braver than I am," she finally said. "I would have either slammed the door in his face or taken him back immediately. But you're making him earn it, making him prove he's changed." I don't know if it's bravery or self-preservation. Maybe it's both. On Wednesday, Thomas called. Julian told me what happened, what you said to him. His voice was warm with approval. Winston would be proud of you, Genevieve. You didn't make it easy for him. Should I have? God, no. That boy needed to understand what he'd lost, needed to feel the full weight of his choices. He paused. For what it's worth, I think he gets it now. He came to see me yesterday, talked for 2 hours about how to rebuild himself, how to be a better man. Didn't mention Nikki once. It was all about him. What he'd done wrong, how he'd failed his own values. That's good. That's what he needs to focus on. He asked me something interesting. He asked if I thought you'd ever really forgive him. What did you tell him? I told him that forgiveness and trust are different things. You might forgive him tomorrow. But trust? That's going to take time. And if he's not willing to put in that time, then he doesn't deserve either one. On Thursday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a full day off. No boutiques, no phone calls, no business. I went to the Museum of Fine Arts and spent hours wandering through galleries, remembering what it felt like to just exist without the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. In front of a Monet, I thought about Winston, about how he used to bring me here on slow Sunday afternoons, how we'd stand in front of paintings and make up stories about the people in them, how simple life had seemed then, before widowhood, before Julian's marriage, before everything got so complicated. I'm doing the right thing, aren't I? I whispered to his memory. Making him earn his way back? The painting didn't answer, of course, but somehow, standing there in the quiet of the museum, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. Winston would have approved. He'd always believed in natural consequences, in letting people, even our son, learn from their mistakes. On Friday, exactly 1 week after Julian had shown up at my door, my phone rang at noon. His name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello, Julian. Hi, Mom. His voice was tentative, hopeful. I know it's been a week. I was hoping, would you be free for lunch today? I understand if you need more time. I just thought, where did you have in mind? There's this new Italian place in the North End, Trattoria Marcella. I made a reservation for 1 o'clock, but if you'd rather go somewhere else, or if today doesn't work, 1 o'clock is fine. I'll meet you there. The silence on the other end was thick with relief. Thank you. Thank you, Mom. I'll see you then. I arrived at the restaurant 5 minutes early. It was a small, intimate place. White tablecloths, soft lighting, the smell of garlic and fresh bread. Julian was already there, sitting at a corner table, wearing a simple navy suit. No wedding ring on his finger anymore. He stood when he saw me, pulling out my chair. Thank you for coming. You're welcome. I sat down, accepted the menu from the waiter, and we ordered in silence. Once we were alone, Julian took a breath. I wanted to tell you what I've been doing this week. I'm listening. I filed for divorce on Monday. Nikki's already moved out. She's staying with friends and threatening legal action, but her lawyer told her she has no case. The prenup is solid. He paused. I also put the house on the market. That surprised me. Why? Because I can't live there anymore. Every room reminds me of what I did to you. And honestly, it never felt like mine. It always felt like your house that you were letting me borrow. He met my eyes. I found an apartment in Cambridge. Small, nothing fancy. I'm downsizing, simplifying. That sounds wise. I've also been seeing a therapist, started on Tuesday. I need to understand why I let myself be manipulated so easily, why I abandoned my principles so quickly, his voice caught, why I treated the person who loves me most in the world like she was disposable. I didn't say anything, just waited. The therapist asked me something interesting. She asked me when I started valuing peace over truth, when I started choosing comfort over character. He smiled sadly. I think it was after Dad died. I was so desperate not to lose anyone else that I started making myself smaller, easier, more accommodating. And Nikki exploited that perfectly. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to work on it. On being uncomfortable when necessary. On speaking up even when it causes conflict. On valuing the right things instead of the easy things. He reached across the table, then stopped, uncertain if he should touch me. I took his hand. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because he was trying. Really trying. I'm proud of you, I said quietly. for doing this work, for being honest with yourself. I have a long way to go. We both do. Rebuilding trust isn't a one-time event, Julian. It's going to be months, maybe years, of consistent action, of you showing up, of you proving that this isn't just a crisis response that fades when things get comfortable again. I know, and I'm ready for that. He squeezed my hand. I was thinking, maybe we could restart our Sunday lunches? Not weekly at first, maybe monthly to start, and we can build from there? I don't want to rush this. I want to do it right. Monthly lunches. It was so much less than we'd had before, but it was honest, realistic, a foundation we could actually build on. I think that sounds perfect. The food arrived and we ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Julian said something that surprised me. I've been thinking about Dad a lot this week, about what kind of man he was, how he treated you, how he treated everyone. He was strong, but he was also kind. He stood up for what was right, but he never bullied people into agreeing with him. Julian looked at me. I want to be like that, like he was, like you are. You can be, but you have to choose it every day. I will, I promise. We finished lunch and walked out into the bright autumn afternoon. On the sidewalk, Julian turned to me. Can I hug you? I nodded, and he pulled me into his arms. This man who was both my little boy and a stranger I was getting to know again. He held me tightly, and I felt him trembling. I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. I love you too, and we're going to be okay. Eventually. He pulled back, wiping his eyes. Next month? Same time? Next month. I watched him walk away down the street, his shoulders straighter than they'd been in weeks. He turned back once, waved, then disappeared around the corner. I stood there for a moment, feeling the sun on my face, and thought about everything that had happened. The ultimatum, the 2 weeks of silence, the screenshots of manipulation, the tears and promises and tentative new beginning. I'd lost my son for a while. But maybe, just maybe, I was getting him back. Not the old Julian who I'd idealized and coddled, but a new version. One who'd learned hard lessons about weakness and character. One who understood that love without respect was worthless. One who might actually become the man his father and I always believed he could be. I pulled out my phone and texted Octavia. First lunch done. It went well. He's trying. Her response came immediately. Good. Make him keep trying. You deserve nothing less. She was right. I did deserve nothing less. And for the first time in 2 years, I actually believed I might get it. I walked back to my car, climbed in, and drove toward my boutique. I had work to do, a business to run, a life to live that wasn't defined by being someone's mother. But now, alongside all of that, I had something else. Hope. Hope that my son would prove himself worthy of my trust again. Hope that our relationship could be rebuilt on a stronger foundation. Hope that those 3 words I'd said, I love you, hadn't been the end of our story, but the beginning of a new chapter. One where both of us knew our worth, our boundaries, and what we would and wouldn't accept. That night, I opened a bottle of Winston's favorite wine, the last one from our collection, and raised a glass to his memory. He's finding his way back, I told the photograph on my mantle. It's going to take time, but I think he's actually going to do it. The photograph didn't answer. But somehow, I knew Winston heard me, and that he approved. I'd done something incredibly difficult. I'd loved my son enough to let him go, and brave enough to let him earn his way back. And in doing so, I'd saved us both.